Welcome, everyone, to the Coinbureau podcast. My name is Guy. This gentleman's name...
Gentleman?
Oh, yes. This man's name is Mad Mike Mooch.
The third.
The third. Goodness me, they still haven't got it right. And today I thought we would, following on from our discussion about the cashless society from the last couple of episodes, which I don't know about you, Mike, but I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I've made a concerted effort to use cash a bit more.
And how's it going?
It's good.
Yeah? You're carrying a few quid around?
Carrying cash. We've got 100 quid in with there.
Okay, that's good to know. All right. Well, I'll have that when you're out of the room then.
Yeah.
But yes, I thought that I was really really enjoyed that cashless society episode that we did.
And it's becoming more and more apt. And I sort of was looking at... I saw a YouTube video about it in Sweden.
Oh, yeah.
Where Sweden is a big push to be sort of a cashless society.
Yeah.
And the government is like... Because obviously... Russia is on their doorstep, and the government apparently has been sending out prepper advice to them for the last 2 years. And like this year, they've gone, okay, cool. Look, we said be prepared for a few days, maybe go for a week.
Yeah,
and it's kind of crazy that a government is sending out documents to every household. This is what you need to have to be able to survive in the woods for 4 or 5 days. Actually, no, make it a week.
Yeah. It's very sort of Scandinavian pragmatism, isn't it? It's like, I think they're even more so in Finland, because obviously Finland has got a very long border with Russia, and they've had Barneys before. But I think like Finland, there's a huge kind of network of bunkers and things like that. It's like I think Putin would invade Finland at his peril. I think those guys are pretty tough, and they're pretty well prepared as well.
They've got money.
Yeah.
I think.
I think
all those Nordic sort of Scandi sort of places have got.
Yeah, they're all quite well
flush, aren't they?
Yeah. So after last week's discussion about cashless society, there was something we mentioned a lot. We talked a lot about privacy in that discussion. And I thought we'd just devote another episode to kind of talking about that in a little bit more detail, because since we recorded that cashless society episode, there have been some pretty significant developments in the crypto space, which have huge implications for privacy. And it's we'll talk about those in a moment or so. But yeah, basically, the crypto industry is now kind of having to look again. I mean, privacy has always kind of been a talking point in crypto, but it's kind of really floated up to the surface, floated up almost, to the top of the agenda in a lot of ways, especially over the last few weeks. So I thought it would be interesting to just have a discussion about privacy and about privacy in crypto and kind of where we go from here. And I thought just for you, we might even touch on something that I know is very close to your heart, but we'll get to that. So kind of lots to discuss, not just about privacy, but also privacy in relation to crypto. And therefore we can fulfill our remit of talking about cryptocurrency, but also have what I hope is an interesting discussion about something that's so fundamentally important these days and is something that's slipping away. So let's start by just talking about privacy, I guess, in the internet age, because privacy is something that is very much enshrined in various parts of the US Constitution. We've also got things like the Human Rights Act, which was introduced in Europe in 1998. I remember that was a big thing. You remember when the Labour government won a landslide here in the UK in 1997, and one of the big things that they did the following year was make us part of the European Human Rights Act. And Article 8 of that Act protects your right to respect for your private life, your family life, your home, and your correspondence, letters, telephone calls, and emails, for example. So this is something that's very much enshrined in the idea, particularly of, I guess you'd call it, Western democracy. It's something that is a fundamental right, and it is something, as I say, that's under threat. And obviously, governments and the like have got a kind of get-out clause for this. I thought I'd quote this one. This is again from the European Human Rights Act. Quote, there shall be no interference by a public authority with the exercise of this right, except as is in accordance with the law and is necessary in a democratic society in the interests of national security, public safety, or the economic well-being of the country, for the prevention of disorder or crime, for the protection of health or morals, or for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. So it's this it seems privacy is this very kind of elastic thing. You know, it's enshrined as a right, as something that we have a right to, but also there are circumstances where that right can be taken away. And I guess so much of what is happening today is how elastic is that? You know, where is the line beyond which a government cannot cross? And obviously, in more recent times, certainly in the 21st century, we've seen things like the Patriot Act that the US introduced in the wake of 9/11 and all those other terrorist. Do you remember people were getting sent anthrax in the post and that sort of stuff? So they introduced the Patriot Act to kind of crack down on terrorism.
But what a great name. No one's going to disagree with the Patriot Act.
Yeah, if you don't like the Patriot Act, you must be an asshole.
Yeah, or a commie.
Or a goddamn red. Actually, do you know Patriot stands for something? So Patriot is an acronym. So the formal name of the statute is the Uniting and Strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. Patriot. Which I had no idea of. And I think whoever reverse engineered that acronym, it should win some sort of prize.
Yeah.
Because there's no way I could do that. That's very clever. So the US Patriot Act was introduced in the name of preventing and combating terrorism. But we've seen it being used to encroach on individual privacy in the name of preventing terrorism. I think it's been kind of all too easily abused in the sort of 20 or so years since it was introduced. And I think another thing that struck me when thinking about privacy was it's kind of telling that every time we imagine a really dystopian society, and I guess the best example is something like George Orwell in 1984. But there are plenty of others, both in literature and in film and popular culture. Whenever we imagine a dystopian society, it always seems that privacy is one of the things that straight away you notice has gone. And in 1984, they have these. Everyone has a telescreen on the wall, which is, bear in mind this was written in 1948, so televisions were a very new thing. But everyone had a telescreen which was kind of on all the time. You couldn't turn it off, and the authorities were able to watch you through it as well. And there's an incident where there are kind of police helicopters flying around and they're always snooping in people's windows and stuff. And basically privacy, individual privacy, is a thing of the past.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that seems to be a common theme of any kind of nightmare society, in that individual privacy is gone. But I think it's one of the things that's. It's a difficult concept to grasp, privacy, isn't it? Because sometimes it's that idea of, well, why?
If I've got nothing to hide,
yeah, and we've touched on this before a few times. This,
which is a simplistic way to look at it.
Yeah,
because what you've got to hide may be you being, for example, if the resistance.
Yeah,
if you're the resistance, what have you got to hide? I'm hiding me being the good guy.
Yeah.
From the bad guys. And I think that people's views on government are sometimes rose-tinted, or like, they don't think the worst.
They assume that governments are always working in
your best interest.
In your best interest.
When in actual fact, it's probably for corporations or sort of cronies.
Absolutely. Which is this kind of, which is modern capitalism, which is shareholder capitalism. It can be quite difficult, I think, to put your finger on why exactly privacy is so important. It's like, well, why don't you want anyone reading your emails or seeing where you spend your money or looking in your window? It's like, I don't know. I just don't.
And I think it's because the vast majority of people don't have any secrets that are too important. You know, it's like, what do I do? Is what everyone sort of goes, well, I don't do. I'm not a bad person. Why? You know, if someone is looking at me, I don't see why that's a big deal. But then you have things like, you know, Edward Snowden, sort of being a whistleblower, and you know how governments are unscrupulous.
Yeah.
Oh. They're watching us. But like, you know, so how there'd be influential people and their daughter had a drink drive accident or something like that, or was involved in some minor sort of drugs offense, and they were blackmailed or pressured and coerced into doing something that they would not normally do for the benefit of the government and not necessarily the benefit of the people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, individual privacy is just it's so specific to every single person. I think everyone pretty much has some aspect of their life, at least, that they would not want anyone else to know. However innocent that person may be, however inoffensive, however quietly they live or whatever, there are just certain things that you don't want anyone else to know. And what those things are is not really our business to even speculate on. It's just your business. And it makes, I think it makes this idea of, well, why do you want privacy? It can be difficult to answer. It's just, I just don't want you, other people, the government, corporations, etc. I just don't want you to know that, because it's none of your business. It's private to me. But I think the internet has changed the game so comprehensively, and it's made our personal data, you know, our privacy really, such a lucrative prize for not only governments but for private corporations as well, who harvest it and sell it and use it for advertising purposes, all this sort of stuff. It seems now that our privacy is kind of ebbing away faster than before, because we have this amazing communications tool, which is
and because we're sort of new. Almost so willing to give it up.
Yeah,
like it's like social media has really sort of made it the norm to display your life, to display your, you know, and maybe not be your actual life, but be outputting stuff. Cool. This is me. Don't forget me. Me.
Yeah,
me.
To make yourself into your own personal brand.
Yeah.
And all that horrible crap. Yeah. It's so true. And I think,
please do follow me at Moodabout on all socials, please.
Coinbureau.com. No, it's absolutely right. And we touched on this when we talked about cashlessness, didn't we? We've sacrificed a lot of privacy on the altar of convenience, because it's so easy to use a card. It's so easy, and it's so easy to use these services. And you know, let's face it, things like Facebook came along, and they were convenient.
It was convenient, but I also think that it is just we are sheep. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, and it affects kids first. So if every kid is on TikTok, your kid will want to be on TikTok, because it's just the fear of missing out. Kids want to conform. Kids want to be part of the group. Kids want to be involved.
Yeah.
And you know, if you get the kids at that point, and then they've got those accounts as they grow up, and you know, as they start wanting to sort of meet boys or girls or whatever, then you know, it's getting them young and getting them into the system. And these kids are growing up with their lives on social media already, so it's kind of eroded that. Hey, hang on, what about if I just want to have something to myself?
Yeah, they've no frame of reference. They've no idea what it's like living without these things. And you're absolutely right, kids especially. But I think a lot of people in general,
I'd say kids. We were the first generation probably to have a bit of both.
Yeah.
You know, we were at uni. There was no Facebook. There was no Instagram.
It came out just after we left.
Yeah,
I remember it. And I remember for a while. Well, we talked about this, haven't we? But you could only get it with certain university email addresses.
And we weren't one of them.
We were too stupid for Facebook. I think standing out from the crowd in that way, you know, making those sorts of decisions is a hard thing to do. And actually taking the steps to preserve your privacy it has been made really inconvenient. I often think, I still use WhatsApp because all my friends use it. Yeah. I don't like using WhatsApp because
I
don't...
Meta.
Yeah, and I would much rather...
Very interesting story, WhatsApp. actually. It's I don't want to derail this, but there's the guys who set it up were just all about privacy.
Because it is end-to-end encrypted, isn't it?
It's changed.
Okay.
A lot. It is encrypted, but it's not what it was. Definitely. And the way that they set it up and the sort of foundations of it have been, the goalposts have moved.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of great YouTube videos on it. Go, watch the story of WhatsApp because it is fascinating.
Okay. I will. Maybe we can do a podcast on that.
Maybe I'll WhatsApp you.
We'll talk about it on WhatsApp later. Have to find a crypto angle for it though. But I think it's fair to say that we were just as people, just as a species, were really unprepared for the impact the internet would have. And we have allowed those freedoms to be rowed back because of what the internet can give us. It gives us so much. But it's worth remembering this, and again, this is something we covered in earlier episodes. We covered it when we started to talk about Bitcoin, but I thought it was worth kind of revisiting this. There were a few people who weren't so unprepared for what the internet was going to do to privacy.
Satoshi Nakamoto,
among others. But yeah, mostly, the cypherpunks in general. And we had the likes of...
and do you think that's because they are nerds and they have seen these several dystopian sort of storylines?
I think there could be an element of that.
Through their sort of reading of fiction and
yeah. Let's make a gross generalization, which will have some degree of truth to it.
Yeah.
Lots of the cypherpunks would almost certainly have read quite a lot of science fiction, and there would have been, a lot of kind of dystopian sort of society, dystopian, futuristic, whatever sort of societies like that. And I would be very willing to bet that a lot of cypherpunk ideas were partly inspired by those kinds of
and possibly also real life events that have been happening.
Yeah. I mean, these are very clever people, very sort of with an understanding, I guess, of computing and computer science and the internet and how we communicate and cryptography and things like that. That the rest of us, that just leave the rest of us in the dust. So, yeah, they were very kind of prescient. They saw pretty much before anyone else what this amazing new form of communication could do, and also the dangers of it, and how something was going to have to be done in order to kind of mitigate against that. So it's again their contribution before we even get to cryptocurrency is really, really important. Just because they had all this foresight. And remember that one of the big concerns over privacy in the internet came about with this idea of transacting online. And you had people like David Chaum, who we've talked about, these prominent cypherpunks who were thinking, how are we going to do this safely? How are we going to come up with a system whereby, they alighted on cryptography. How are we going to use cryptography to protect, so as we can transact online, so we can use the internet to its full potential? And this obviously drove David Chaum to invent Digicash, your favorite.
My favorite.
I thought we'd get in a reference to Digicash there, because I know how much you love it.
Look, I love the name.
It's great. It's such an interesting project, and as we discussed, I think it was in episode 5 when we first talked about Bitcoin. It did come quite close to to catching on, and I quoted this from David Chaum in that Bitcoin episode, but it's worth citing again. Quote: this was from a BBC interview that he did. Privacy is intimately tied to human potential, and it's an extraordinarily important aspect of democracy. So this cypherpunk ideal, they really understood how important privacy is and how it was going to be threatened. And I think understanding that debate around privacy in the age of the internet is key to understanding why cryptocurrency emerged in the first place. It wasn't created in order that we could all buy dog coins online. It was created with this...
Just like there was one of those early sort of email threads or forum chats, and it's just like talking about how this is going to change the world. Shiba Inu.
Christmas Floki Inu coin. Let's to the moon. Yeah. But and I mean, this would be this. I think if I was introduced to Satoshi Nakamoto, one of the I think probably the first question I'd like to ask him would be along the lines of, you invented Bitcoin for very specific purposes, but what do you make of the fact that privacy in crypto is now very much an illusion? For in most
including
instances.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, especially Bitcoin. I think. I mean, Bitcoin is amazing, but one of the big drawbacks is that it's so traceable.
But I don't think that's a drawback. Like there was an incident where these ATM machines were sort of pumping out. People were depositing Bitcoin and taking cash out.
Oh yeah.
And people got their cash, but this company basically lost all its Bitcoin because they got hacked. Mm-hmm. But there's a safe bet that they will probably be able to get that back because it's so traceable.
Because it's traceable, yeah. I mean, it does certainly.
I have like a, it's not like an NFT where it's kind of gone, isn't it? Like if someone has an NFT and they hack it, then it's kind of gone.
Well, it's still it's certainly true that the transaction can't be reversed. Mm. But this is the thing with Bitcoin, Ethereum, most major cryptos, is that transactions on blockchains are publicly viewable, and they are publicly viewable forever.
Yeah.
And I think this could have consequences in the future, because if there is a big crackdown on crypto, then the authorities could conceivably go quite a long way back in time, and they would have a record of where you were spending that Bitcoin way back in 2010 or something like that. And I mean, that is a genuine concern. But yeah, blockchain tracking is becoming more and more sophisticated. And this idea that you often see advanced in the kind of mainstream media and elsewhere, that crypto is an ideal tool for criminals, for hackers.
Absolutely not.
It really isn't. Like, if you were a hacker and and you got you stole you got the ransom for your ransomware in Bitcoin or something like that, you're screwed, because you can never cash out. You'd be
unless you do it through someone else's account.
Well, unless you use, there are various tools for doing that, and or tools certainly for kind of breaking that visible chain, which we'll get onto in a moment. But blockchain tracking companies, the tools that they use are getting more and more sophisticated. And basically, criminals, I guess, are way better off using cash. Cash is much harder to trace than crypto. So before we talk about privacy tools in crypto, let's take a quick break, shall we?
Sure.
Welcome back to part 2. I've called this part, I've noted down, I thought we'd call this Crypto Privacy Tools and a Big Old Can of Worms.
Okay.
Because, I think it's fair to say that certainly in recent weeks as well, a big can of worms has been opened. Most cryptos are so publicly traceable, so viewable. There have been tools developed to try and combat this. Now, the one that we've talked about quite a few times before is privacy coins. The
Monero.
Monero. We've also got things like Zcash. We've also got coins that have sort of implemented privacy features. So we'll talk about some of those at maybe a bit later on. But another popular tool for privacy has been mixers. Now, these are basically designed to sever the link between the sending and receiving addresses of a crypto transaction. So let's have a hypothetical example. Let's say you're a Russian, you live somewhere in Russia, and you have family in Ukraine. And you want to send them some money because you know that they're having a hard time, whatever. You decide that you're going to use crypto because you don't want to have to send it through the banking system. You certainly don't want to have to put cash in the post. I doubt the post between Russia and Ukraine is working particularly well at the moment. So you've decided that you're going to send them some cryptocurrency, which is great because it's trustless, it's permissionless. There's no one in the middle of that transaction. But you know that the Russian government, which is not a government you want to get on the wrong side of, they could quite easily track that transaction, and they could see that crypto being moved, and that could land you in a lot of trouble. It could land your relatives in a lot of trouble. So what you have the option to do is send your crypto to a mixer. A mixer is basically like a smart contract, which mixes it together with amounts of the same crypto from other sources. I guess you can think of it as like a tombola.
Shuffling the pack.
Yeah, it's like putting your money into it. Yeah,
so everyone puts a pound coin into a tombola.
Yeah,
cool. Everyone else gets a pound coin out, but it may not necessarily be that pound coin from the same person who sent it to you.
And you've got no way of proving that the pound coin that you've taken out was the pound coin that you've taken in, because it's all sort of mixed and tumbled together. I guess that's an easy way of thinking about it. And then the same amount can be withdrawn from the mixing protocol. And to touch on an element of crypto privacy, which is...
So they're kind of like just little nodes where you can pay through, and because it's just like anonymous, or it's just that's all it's there for, it's impossible or more trickier to trace.
Yeah. As I say, it breaks the link between your sending address and the receiving address that you're sending it to.
For a small fee, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, that's how they make the mixer. The protocol will make its money. Yeah, it'll charge a small transaction fee on top of that. So now the withdrawing address, the way they withdraw it is they use something called a zero knowledge proof. Now, this is basically a cryptographic way of proving that you have some information without revealing that information. And this is something, I mean, we could start talking about zero knowledge proofs. It's very, very kind of dense and involved. What I'd like to do actually at some point is have an episode where we get kind of a privacy expert in to talk about zero knowledge proofs, because it's a rabbit hole that goes pretty deep. But basically, you use this the receiving address is able to use this zero knowledge proof to say, I know that this amount of ETH, say, has gone in, and therefore I am able to withdraw it. So the mixer has obscured where this transaction came from. Now, this is essentially how a protocol called Tornado Cash worked. And I mean,
now that's a name I like.
Yeah,
anything with Digicash, Tornado Cash.
It's all right in your book.
Tornado Cash is better than Digicash.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it? And actually, Tornado Cash, I think it's quite a useful name to how you think about the protocol, because it's like sort of slinging your coins into a tornado, which mixes it up. So, and then you take them out elsewhere. And it's a good name for a mixer. Now, Tornado Cash is basically an Ethereum-based mixer, so it can be used to put through ETH or other kind of ETH-based tokens. And basically, what has happened is that Tornado Cash has been a couple of weeks ago was sanctioned by the U.S. Department of the Treasury, by a sort of subsection of the Treasury Department called the Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC. OFAC. We've been sanctioned. Yeah, exactly. Now, I'll just read you the Wikipedia definition of OFAC. So the Office of Foreign Assets Control is a financial intelligence and enforcement agency of the U.S. Treasury Department. It administers and enforces economic and trade sanctions in support of U.S. national security and foreign policy objectives. Now, yeah, OFAC is something, is a organization,
not to be fucked with.
Not to be fucked. Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to fall on the wrong side of this guy. It's a very, very powerful department. And I
mean, when you say, foreign policy and government interests.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's
not a train you stand in the way.
No.
And I mean the
ask Iraq.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the penalties for sanctions violations can be pretty big. I mean, like we're talking sort of 30 odd years in jail, $10 million fine. It's not good. So if you getting sanctioned is a big deal. So now the reason why OFAC decided to sanction Tornado Cash was because it was being used by the Lazarus Group. And are you familiar with these guys? I mean,
no.
I put that. Have you heard of them? Turns out I'm working for the CIA.
Yeah.
I'm working for OFAC. Are you familiar with them? Oh yeah, I know a couple.
Oh, Laz.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, you're under...
No, I haven't. I'm not familiar with the Lazarus Group.
Okay, the Lazarus Group. Now, this is really, really interesting. There's some very interesting material about Lazarus Group out there. The Lazarus Group is basically North Korea's hacking department.
Okay. And you thought, that's me?
Well, you know. I know you've got connection.
Yeah.
I thought you might have heard through your underworld people. Anyhow, we'll talk about that in a shipping container elsewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Treasury had identified that the Lazarus Group, which is behind numerous kind of crypto hacks and exploits, all sorts of bad stuff.
Rascals.
They are rascals. Yeah. They were using Tornado Cash to launder stolen crypto. And now, let's not pretend otherwise here. Like Tornado Cash was certain, there was
an element of that happening.
Yeah, that it was certainly being used to launder funds. There's no question about that.
But casinos launder funds.
Well, yeah.
Banks were set up. HSBC was laundering the cartel's money.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll touch on this.
Not that that's okay.
not condoning it for a moment.
But sometimes something's set up for privacy, or for one reason, maybe used for another, like a car wash. If you're
absolutely. Well, this is something I want to touch on in just a moment, because this is an argument that a lot of people have made in relation to these Tornado Cash sanctions. But before we get to that, so yeah, OFAC basically claimed when it announced these sanctions that $7 billion had been laundered through Tornado Cash, which is a lot of money. However, this isn't actually true.
That's how much has been used.
Yeah, that's
not everything is laundered money.
Exactly right. So, yeah, $7 billion worth of crypto has gone through Tornado Cash, but not all of that is illicit funds. In fact, Chainalysis, which is arguably, I think, the biggest blockchain tracking company, and is a US-based company, is very much tied to the authorities. Chainalysis estimates that only around 17% of the funds going through Tornado Cash were related to illicit activity. Now, that is still a lot. That is still a lot of money, But certainly, it's nothing like the $7 billion that OFAC claimed.
I was watching a documentary on Chinese gangs laundering money through Vancouver casinos, and they had a similar sort of figure. I don't think it was as high as 17%, but I think it was 8 or 9% or something like that of the casino's turnover was something to do with Chinese. Yeah. Or was it the real estate? Anyway, but it was a figure that I was like, wow, that is a lot of money.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, the idea that a lot of people believe in, that crypto is just one big massive money laundering scheme, it's nonsense. Especially in comparison to the amount of money laundering that goes on in the real world. I mean, we're talking trillions of dollars here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as I say, it's been estimated that...
Look at those candy shops on Oxford Street.
Yeah, they're basically money laundering operations.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Now, the effects of these sanctions on Tornado Cash being announced were pretty immediate and pretty scary. Like, the Tornado Cash website went down. The code disappeared from GitHub. Now, bear in mind, this is an important thing to remember. This was an open source code. So this code was available for everyone to see, for everyone to copy, for everyone to fork. So the code disappeared from GitHub. And now what was also sanctioned was not only the Tornado Cash protocol itself, but also a number of wallets that were associated with the protocol. And these held something in the region of like over $400 million worth of crypto.
Not your keys, not your...
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there was obviously a lot of money sitting in these wallets. Now, any USDC being the big stablecoin, I think it's the fourth largest cryptocurrency by market cap. And the second largest stablecoin. Any USDC that was sitting in wallets associated with Tornado Cash was frozen by Circle, which is the company that issues USDC. And we also started to see decentralized applications blocking access to their front ends. Any wallets that had interacted with Tornado Cash, bear in mind that everything is viewable on chain. They found themselves unable to interact with a lot of DeFi protocols, with a lot of decentralized applications. We also had some of the big RPC providers. Now, these are basically services that enable decentralized applications to communicate with blockchains. They began restricting access to Tornado Cash smart contract. And so this was another, this big sort of centralized entity was blocking access to Tornado Cash. And then we also saw someone began sending very, very small amounts of ETH to that had been through Tornado Cash to well-known ETH addresses. Now, are you familiar? I think we've talked about this before, this idea of a blockchain domain, of a human-readable blockchain domain. So you could have madmikemooch.eth, which also functions as a crypto wallet.
Got it.
So a number of people, Jimmy Fallon, the comedian, Steve Aoki, who you've heard of and I'm not all that familiar with, Brian Armstrong, who's the CEO of Coinbase, they found themselves being dusted, i.e. because...
So basically contaminating their wallet so that they were crypto shut down as well.
Well, basically sending them, I guess, contaminated ETH because it had come from, these Tornado Cash associated wallets.
Oh God, and that could be abused by government as well.
Yeah, so... I did a video on this last week, which I'm going to put the audio up as a podcast. In fact, it should already be up by the time this is released. So if anyone listening kind of wants to know more about what's been going on with Tornado Cash, then watch or listen to that. But yeah, I did speculate in that video. It's like, okay, so does that mean Jimmy Fallon has been...
I've always suspected him, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I mean, he was...
You don't get to the top by being just a nice, funny guy.
Yeah.
We're on to you, Jimmy.
Yeah, Jimmy, we're coming. The feds are coming for you. But I mean, is he now in breach of sanctions because he has interacted, even though he hasn't himself, but, because he's received...
Well, we don't know that.
Because he's received... We don't. But I think Jimmy Fallon deserves the presumption of innocence. Throwing up all these kind of questions. What happens to people staking ETH? What happens if they receive ETH? This contaminated ETH? It basically it's basically opened a can of worms. What it's done. We all know what they're like. Now, the scariest thing, however, the most worrying thing, was that one of the Tornado Cash developers has been arrested by Dutch police. Stop! You're under arrest. He was arrested in Amsterdam. At the time that we record this, it's been nearly 2 weeks ago. He's still not been charged, and it's still not clear. This is a chap called...
What's he been arrested for?
Well...
It's not another
We're not entirely
thing.
clear. It's not entirely clear. They haven't actually made it clear what law this chap has been arrested under. His name is Alexei Pertsev. And he's being held. The kind of assumption is that they're going to charge him with some sort of sanctions violation or money laundering thing, but that's all complete speculation. That's scary. Like, a guy has been arrested for writing code, and we still don't know what he's actually been charged with. And this is 2 weeks later, and he's still under arrest. Now, obviously, and as I said, obviously all this is being done because of the fear of sanctions violation, and which obviously carries these pretty severe penalties. And I should say, like, these entities like Circle that's been restricted, that's been freezing.
Well, I think also, this is an intimidation, sort of tactic. This guy has been arrested, not charged, held there on some technicality, and he'd probably have. Because I watch a lot of YouTube, obviously, and there's a couple of criminal sort of podcasts, and the US government and the legal system is just a bully. It's not there for justice. It's there for the win.
Yeah.
And so you'll be charged. You'll have all of these charges, racked up. So you're facing hundreds of years in prison. And then you'll get a plea bargain. Yeah. And it's kind of like, okay, cool. Well, this is the plea bargain. It's not what you've done. It's not, but it's going to be, all they care about is that win. Yeah. And it's the intimidation, and it's kind of like that fear of, if you don't take the plea bargain, they go for you even harder and make examples of you. And it's not for justice. It's for fear.
Yeah. And you get people who have done nothing wrong. And it's like, okay, I take a plea bargain, I get 10 years, or I fight it, I could get 40 years.
And this is where privacy comes in.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this guy's just written some code. What's there to hide if I've not done anything wrong?
Yeah. There's so much. There's so many. There's going to be so many legal consequences of this, because what OFAC has done is pretty unprecedented. They've sanctioned a piece of code, and it throws up all kind of questions. Because code is considered
law.
Code is law. Ask any cypherpunk. But since 1996, code has been considered a speech in the US.
So there's a freedom of speech.
Yeah, and that should be protected under the First Amendment. Bear in mind, I should say this guy has been arrested in
the Netherlands.
In the Netherlands. So, whether there's talk of extraditing him to the US, I don't know. But in terms of what's happening in the US, this is a US entity. OFAC is a US entity that has imposed these sanctions, and what it is essentially doing is sanctioning a piece of code, speech. A public good. Yeah, it's sanctioning speech, and the legal implications of this are, the Treasury is kind of effectively saying that the speech itself is illegal. Now that is a quagmire that is going to take a lot of
lawyers are going to make a lot of money.
Yeah, there are going to be legal challenges to this, and there are. CoinShares, which is a crypto lobbying group, is already kind of talking about this, and there's no way that this can be allowed to just stand. But kind of going back to what you said about the U.S. justice system, it's a bully. So although there will be legal challenges to this, they're going to take a heck of a long time to resolve. And whilst they are unresolved, those sanctions remain in place. And I think, going back to what I was sort of touching on earlier, the fact that you have all these entities, you have the likes of Circle, and Infura, which is this RPC node provider, and other kind of entities, they obviously come in for criticism for doing what they're doing. But, you can't really blame them, because you don't get on the wrong side of the US government. You don't violate sanctions unless you want to spend 30 years in jail or face a massive fine. They don't really have a choice. But the consequences of this for decentralization are dire, and we'll get onto that shortly.
But so what country could you set up something which is imperial, like is free from US pressure?
Well,
apart from China or Russia, which has its own sort of pressure.
Yeah, you don't really have many options. The US has a pretty long reach, and I guess you're.
What countries don't they extradite?
There are a number of countries that don't extradite to the US. I don't think the UAE does, the United Arab Emirates.
There we go. Saudi. I suppose that's.
Yeah. So there are a few, but I don't think France does, actually. I don't think France extradite.
I think you're right.
Yeah. But it's you get on the wrong side of US authorities at your peril.
Yeah.
Just ask Edward Snowden. Last I heard, he was still in Moscow. So yeah, basically, This is a tool that's been sanctioned. And as you kind of touched on as well, it's like if you're sanctioning a tool, a public good, because it's been used by criminals, you can extrapolate that out pretty easily. It's like, well, okay, so are you going to sanction cash because criminals use it? As we've talked about.
Telephones.
Yeah. Drug dealers use telephones, so why not sanction them? Another example I used was parks. Are you going to close off access to public parks because drug dealers use them? Are you going to close off access to roads because drug dealers drive on them, or airlines because the Mexican cartels might use? I don't know. It's crazy. There's also the example: are you going to sanction the whole of the internet? Because let's face it, there's a lot of crime that goes on there. So yeah, where this all goes, where this all leads, is kind of anyone's guess. But it's going to be the consequences of this are going to play out for years, really, and the consequences for privacy are pretty worrying. Now, really, I think the sanctions on Tornado Cash itself are only going to affect those people who are legitimately using the protocol. Remember, this is open source code. It's up there on the internet. It can't be taken down. So Tornado, you can still use Tornado Cash. So the criminals who were using it in the first place can carry on using it, because they don't care. They're criminals. They could also someone could also fork the code and create Cyclone Cash, Hurricane Cash, Mad Mike Mooch Cash, whatever they want. So really the only
OFAC Cash.
OFAC Cash. I like that. Yeah.
Double down.
Oh, there they are. It's legitimate users, people who were using Tornado Cash for their own for purposes of their own privacy, are really the only ones who have been affected by these sanctions. And it's also, I think it's worth pointing out that this is the most egregious example of this, but that we have seen pushback against other kind of privacy-focused crypto projects in the recent past. A good example is Litecoin. Litecoin implemented some privacy features fairly recently. It had an upgrade which enabled some privacy features, very much opt-in. So it didn't become a full privacy coin. But LTC was delisted from several South Korean exchanges after that. Regulatory pressure was piled on. And we've also got the likes of Monero. I mean, Monero has been in the sights of governments for a long, long time. Now, Monero uses different technology in order to. Monero uses something, among other things, something called ring signatures rather than this kind of mixing, this idea of mixing. So there are other ways that you can protect your privacy in crypto. I don't think we won't kind of talk too much about them because again that's a rabbit hole that goes quite deep. But yeah. Privacy in crypto and by extension, I think privacy itself has really come under attack from these sanctions. And I think it's worth just kind of going back to the idea of the importance of internet privacy, because the tools that were developed by people like Phil Zimmermann, who we met in episode 6, he was the guy who created PGP, Pretty Good Privacy. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but Pretty Good Privacy was this messaging system that used public key cryptography to allow people to basically encrypt their communications. And the US government really threw its toys out of the pram about this. They were very, very worried that, and their argument was like, why would you want to encrypt your communications unless you're an enemy of the US or you're a criminal? And they really went after Phil Zimmermann. They charged him with exporting munitions. They charged him with munitions export without a license because they argued that this PGP and other encryption technologies were basically kind of weapons grade.
Jesus.
Yeah.
This is the bullying, isn't it?
This is the bullying.
It's kind of just abuse of the law.
Yeah.
Munitions.
It's crazy. And do you remember the way Zimmermann got around it got around the restrictions on exporting digital code. He just published the details of PGP as an actual book.
Freedom of speech.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of got in a lot of. The charges were eventually dropped, but
does the bullying stop?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I guess the U.S. government would have seen it as a benefit because it says like, look, if you're gonna develop something like this, it doesn't matter if it's legal. If we don't like it, we will go after you. And the question you have to ask yourself is it worth it? Even if you don't end up getting charged. Is it worth having the threat, having Uncle Sam kind of looming over you for...
Just have your life just be tied up by litigation and court cases. It's the same way, certain unscrupulous businessmen will just litigate you constantly until you don't have any more money.
And we've seen this with journalists as well, speaking out against, I think, a lot of Russians who got sanctioned. A lot of journalists have tried to dig into, why some of these Russians are so damn rich, and have been basically hit with lawsuits. British journalists hit with lawsuits by British law firms in order to just keep them quiet. Yeah, and just make.
And when you're earning not very much money from being a journalist, and it just kind of becomes a lot less appealing.
Yeah. Exactly. It's to gag people. It's pure and simple. Now, weirdly enough, or ironically enough, I guess, that the tools that Phil Zimmerman and others helped create have basically shaped the e-commerce revolution, because they were looking, these encryption technologies have enabled people to safely transact online. So really, the US government was shooting itself in the foot by trying to suppress this stuff. But it kind of shows you why people like the cypherpunks were so obsessed with this. It's something that should concern us all. Privacy it's not just about keeping prying eyes away, but it's about human progress.
And the protection against tyrannical governments.
Yeah, absolutely. And by sanctioning tools like Tornado Cash, the US is kind of setting a pretty dangerous precedent, I think. And it's putting itself on a path to becoming more like China. And we talked about in that last episode about cashless society, didn't we? How China, the surveillance state, and how technology is making that surveillance state even more efficient. So, yeah, this sanctioning of Tornado Cash is a kind of worrying development, and we're going to look. But it has a lot more implications for crypto beyond kind of just privacy. But let's take a quick break, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Welcome back to part 3. Now we're going to talk a bit more.
That was a can of worms.
That really was a can of worms. Yeah, there are worms everywhere. Still worms all over the floor. We're going to be picking them up for days. Is that a dad joke?
Is that a joke?
There we are. So let's talk about what all this means for crypto.
Yeah.
Now, I should start by pointing out that not everyone thinks privacy, crypto privacy, is necessarily a good thing. Institutions, for instance, they don't really care about it, or rather, they want to see a decentralized finance sector that has compliance built in. They want to put an end to what one institutional figure put it as, this kind of cowboy culture in crypto. Institutions, they want to make money, and they certainly don't want to have to fall foul of governments while doing so. And I think you can say, do you remember we touched on this when we talked to Nate from CryptoSlate a few weeks ago. Now, all these kind of hacks and exploits that we've seen of various DeFi protocols, of various crypto platforms over the past few months, millions and millions of dollars stolen, and a lot of that laundered through places like Tornado Cash and elsewhere. And then you've also got this thing of so many of these protocols then actually offer to pay the hacker, a fairly generous bounty in a lot of cases if they return it, which I kind of disagree with. I mean, I see why they do it, but I disagree with it. But, you can see from an institutional point of view, from maybe, an asset manager or a bank or a pension fund or something that wants to invest in crypto, that's not something they're ever going to be comfortable with. So I think they are, and they make the point that there should be consequences for people who commit such crimes. And I agree with them. I don't think you should just be paying them off. And I also don't think that anyone really wants their stolen crypto being used to fund North Korea's nuclear program, which is what the Lazarus Group is basically all about. That's what it exists for. There are certainly arguments against it, but I think innocent people should still have the right to transact privately.
Yeah.
We lose that right at our peril. Or perhaps another way of looking at that is companies and governments shouldn't be able to snoop on private citizens going about their business.
Yeah.
There should be controls against that. Now, the really big, the other kind of worms that has been opened is in regards to Ethereum. And this is what I want to just finish up by talking about.
Is this the 2.0, but no, we can't call it that?
Well, yeah, we can't call it 2.0. But yeah, as you know, Ethereum is in the middle of a massive network upgrade. And the next step of that is coming in a few weeks' time, and that is the merge, which is the transition to proof of stake. Now, we've talked about proof of stake a few times before, but just for the benefit of anyone new to it, just to remind ourselves, when Ethereum becomes proof of stake, the network will then be secured and transactions will be processed by validators. rather than miners. Now, a validator is someone who will have locked up a certain amount of ETH in order to earn the right to process transactions and get the rewards that they do that, either block rewards or transaction fees. And as we know, it's similar to a lottery system in a way that the more you stake, the more tickets you buy, the bigger your chance of winning, the bigger your chance of being selected. Now, obviously, not everyone can afford to do this, which means that the control of a proof-of-stake network and the control of
may
the
lie
Ethereum
with
network,
a few people or fewer.
Yeah. It basically is a centralization issue, and a lot of people are very concerned that these big sort of validators, these big institutions.
Could they not limit how kind of okay, cool? Certain people can only validate so much. There's not a ceiling on it.
I don't think. I don't
to encourage more micro validators.
Well, there are ways like you can. There are staking pools. You can delegate. Ordinary people who might. Let's say you've only got half an ETH that you want to stake. You can do that, and but you obviously earn a fraction, a small percentage of what that staking pool would earn from a block reward or whatever. I think limiting how many validator nodes a company can run, I think that it's difficult.
It's futile essentially because you can just set up.
And it's also kind of centralized in its own way. That who would oversee that? Who would call those shots?
Me.
You would. Are you selflessly putting yourself forward? I'll let Vitalik know. I'm sure he'd like to hear from you. So there is this going to be this concentration of power into the hands of these validators. Now, the concern here is that although validators are incentivized to remain honest, they're incentivized to process transactions properly, they're incentivized to not censor transactions, not interfere in any way, because, well, firstly, they're incentivized because they have a literal stake on the network. So if they start acting dishonestly, then that lowers the value of their stake. Because it lowers trust in the network. So there's that incentive. There's also, I think we've touched on this before, there's also slashing. Now, if you're a validator and you're seen to act dishonestly, or you're seen to you're seen to interfere in any way, you can have some or all of your stake slashed, and that's it. So that as well is a big incentive to behave well, to behave honestly. Problem is, although these incentives exist, these validators can still be coerced into doing so. And this is the big worry, and this is what the Tornado Cash saga has kind of illustrated. And again, and companies like Circle, for instance, which run validator nodes, control huge amounts of liquidity, they could be coerced by the US government to implement censorship at the protocol level. And
is there not enough validators around the world who would be able to, so that it wouldn't just grind to a halt or anything like that?
There are lots. Ethereum certainly does have a lot of validators. It is very, very decentralized, especially compared to other proof-of-stake cryptocurrencies. But I think it's, you have to look at it as a kind of slippery slope. If one validator corrupts the network, if one validator is shown to be processing transactions incorrectly or to be implementing protocol level censorship, then others could also be influenced to do so. And this is centralization in a way. This is putting Ethereum in a position where sanctions could be implemented at the protocol level by the US government, saying to remember companies like Circle or Coinbase, for instance, these are US based entities, and again they might not have any choice but to implement censorship, to interfere at the protocol level. And this puts the trustlessness, the permissionless nature of the Ethereum network into doubt. And if that is what Ethereum becomes, if Ethereum becomes this network that is controlled by these validators who are themselves influenced by what the US government is telling them to do, then Ethereum will become just another kind of proxy tool of the state, and no different really from the current financial system, because the banks and payment providers are all can be influenced by,
be leaned on.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something that the Ethereum community is going to have to address. And there are some who are even calling for the merge to be postponed until this problem can be suitably addressed.
Some sort of solution to that.
Yeah. And a few people are kind of speculating that this could be Ethereum's New York moment. Now, I don't remember if I actually mentioned this when we talked about the history of Bitcoin. But back in 2017, there was something called the New York Agreement, which is where around kind of 50 companies, including some crypto exchanges, got together and tried to get the Bitcoin community to increase Bitcoin's block size. Because they reckon that would make it easier to use and faster. And the Bitcoin community said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do what these institutions want us to do. And it was, this retrospectively, this was a huge moment in Bitcoin development, because it showed that even though a whole load of powerful institutions had got together to try and influence the network, they weren't able to do so. The power of the people prevailed. Yeah, decentralization won out in the end. And there's speculation that this Ethereum could be approaching this sort of moment, and it's up to the Ethereum community, and I mean by Ethereum community, I guess I mean, developers, both Ethereum developers, but also people building on Ethereum and users of Ethereum as well. They're going to have to decide at some point, like, how do we push back against this? And one thing that's been suggested is, and we've a few of us here at Coinbureau have speculated on this. It could be that any stakers, any validators who implement censorship at the protocol level should automatically have their stakes slashed. And this would take the form of an EIP, an Ethereum improvement proposal. So it could be that someone proposes this and a change is made.
If you're going to do that, it's going to be costly and it's not going to work anyway.
It would be difficult. But it may be...
Well, problem solved. Cool.
Yeah, we can go home. And I mean, it's interesting because, like, Brian Armstrong, the Coinbase CEO, he's come out and said that he would rather Coinbase didn't stake at all than be forced to implement protocol-level censorship. Which is really great to hear. It's good he
that
understands
people at the top are echoing the sort of sentiments of or the concerns of a large swathe of the Ethereum community.
Yeah. People like him, they understand what Ethereum is trying to do. They understand that Ethereum is not about being a network.
And maybe this tornado fuck up is a sort of warning shot.
Yeah,
that was necessary. So maybe they shot themselves in the foot.
It could be. Certainly, I think it's made the whole Ethereum and kind of wider crypto community very much aware of what is at stake here. But having said that, there is money to be made from being a validator. So, it remains to be seen. But I think Ethereum is at a kind of bit of a crossroads at the moment, and obviously it's undergoing this huge move across. Moving the changes that Ethereum is trying to implement are huge. Yeah. So, in conclusion, I guess privacy is something you've got to get ready to hear a lot more about, because it's almost certain that governments are going to try and erode privacy further in crypto and elsewhere. They're going to keep doing it because it's about control. And we've got other technologies. It's not just crypto. We've got other technologies, things like AI, facial recognition, being harnessed to fight against personal privacy. And again, going back to something that we touched on in the discussion about the cashless society, we've also got things like central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. So
attacking the marketplace leaders and then introduce your own one.
Yeah. And obviously, this form of central bank issued cash, central bank issued money that is, very, very easy to trace. That's the kind of control that governments dream of, and it is happening. It's happening in places like China, and if we're not careful, it will happen in more so-called liberal democracies like ours as well. So, yeah, that's why I wanted to talk a bit about privacy today, privacy in crypto and privacy in general, because I think, as you say, this Tornado Cash business, which is still ongoing, there's certainly going to be a lot more developments in that story as we go on. But it really has thrown into perspective just what is at stake and what this means for crypto, and how much of an issue privacy is. And I think, people are always talking about, well, what are going to be the next big trends in crypto? What are we going to be talking about in the next bull market, say? And I think privacy could be a big one. I think more and more people are going to realize that they have to take some sort of steps to take control of their own personal privacy, because I think it's one of those things that once it's gone, once you've lost it, you can't.
Yeah, it's like they said with during the whole sickness that we had over the last 2 years, a lot of these government sort of overreaches are not going to be rolled back.
Yeah, very, very true. And I mean, I think it's the same kind. I think the same kind of thing with inflation as well. It's like all these prices are going up. It's like they're not.
Even when the sort of oil starts flowing again, will these big corporations reflect that in there?
Yeah. Hey guys, we're going to cut the price now. Well, that was a bit much, wasn't it? Don't worry. Yeah, I mean, it's a scary thought, because it shows how much power corporations have, and privacy is one of the few ways that you can push back against that. So, yeah.
Another cheery episode.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back. I think we're going to take a little bit of a hiatus next week. Because I'm on my travels a bit. But we will be back. So don't you go anywhere.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Ta-ta.
Bye. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Mike, did you enjoy that?
I loved it. I love these little weekly catch-ups.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's great. Well, let's hope the viewers enjoy it too. Please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed to Coinbureau Clips, where we put these up regularly. Mike and I record a podcast episode every Friday, most Fridays. And we also have our midweek Wednesday podcast episodes coming out too. And that's a chance for you to listen to some of the videos from our main YouTube channel. So, like, subscribe, enjoy.
Tell a friend as well.
Oh yeah, tell a friend. Tell lots of friends.
Tell lots of friends.
Tell all your friends.
Tell both your friends.